Hi, welcome to my video about the movie Clue and what really happened in it. I've done a couple of blog posts and analysis on Clue and who might have been the actual murderer, why certain things happen. And through the years, I've come up with a few different theories of who might have done it or who knew who done it and how everything in the movie can be explained. And this is probably the third version of that. I've seen this movie at this point over 100 times, I'm sure, because this movie came out in about 1985. And when I was in high school, I distinctly remember an entire month where I would come home, make some Eggo waffles, sit down and watch Clue. At this point, I've done so many watchings and analysis and, stop and start and pause and note taking that I think I have a pretty good working theory of what happened in this movie or what could be the story. Let's get started. So warning, this video has so many spoilers. It's just one big giant spoiler. Everything about this movie is going to be spoiled in this video. But I think you need to have seen the movie in order to understand this video at all. So I think we're pretty much safe. If you're watching this video in lieu of actually watching the movie, thank you and I appreciate it. I think you're kind of missing out. And I will start from the beginning to explain everything just to make sure. So what is Clue? Clue is a movie that came out in 1985. It's based on a board game called Cluedo in England when it came out in 1949. But it's simply called Clue in the United States when it was released in the same year. The movie itself is set in 1954. Just a few short years after the game would have been out. And the set design and the costumes reflect that time period. The basic gameplay of Clue is to try to find out who the murderer is based on a series of clues that you're actually receiving from each other player. It starts off with this board that has different rooms in a house, as you can see, the study, the library, billiard room, so forth. Players move around the board and try to get into a room to try to receive more clues so they can figure out who the murderer is. The characters in Clue are all potential murderers in the game, and there's a set number of weapons that might or might not have been the murder weapon. Now, it sounds really funny that you don't even know what the murder weapon is, and actually, you don't even know where the body is. And somehow they had to translate that concept into a movie. So the first character we meet in the movie is Wadsworth. He's the butler. He arrives at the house, goes in, and waits for everybody else to arrive. Then come all the guests, starting with Colonel Mustard, and yes, he's a real colonel. Mrs. White, who's kind of a Black Widow type character. Mrs. Peacock, the senator's wife. Mr. Green, a government worker. Miss Scarlet, the femme fatale. And Professor Plum, who's a psychiatrist. We also have Yvette, the maid, and she's already at the house when Wadsworth arrives. And the last person to arrive is Mr. Boddy, who, if the name implies, is the dead body that we start talking about. So let's see a little bit of the trailer for Clue.
Every person in this room has the perfect motive.
Stand back!
For murder.
What do you mean? Murder.
But only one of these suspects is the murderer.
Despite the serious matter, Clue is a comedy, as you could tell from some of the hijinks going on in that trailer. Yes, this is a PowerPoint presentation. Actually, it's Google Slides. In this video, I will, under fair use for criticism, commentary, and research, deduce who the murderers are in the Clue 1985 movie, where and when they did it, and with what weapon, just like the game. Identify which of the alternate endings is closest to what could have happened, and if you haven't seen the movie, I'll explain that later. Explain my deductions, uncover the secondary mysteries in the movie, more on that later, and compare the movie clues to the book clues, because there are some differences between the movie from 1985, the novelization, and the movie storybook. So the following is a personal opinion of what occurred. It's actually impossible to be absolutely sure of what happened based on the evidence presented in the movie. It's kind of all over the place, and it's obvious that they were planning for the different endings. And so certain things don't really make sense with each other. Prologue. To make a long story short, this video is going to be pretty long, and I don't want to make you sit here if you really just want a fast account. So I'm going to tell you very quickly, here's the most likely thing that really happened. And I did it by editing the actual footage around to suit my purposes.
So which of us killed them?
None of us killed Mr. Boddy or the cook. So who did? The one person who wasn't with us. Yvette.
Yvette!
She was in the billiard room listening to our conversation. She heard the gunshot. She thought he was dead. And while we all examined the bullet hole, she crept into the study, picked up the dagger, ran to the kitchen and stabbed the cook. We didn't hear the cook scream, because Mrs. Peacock was screaming about the poisoned brandy. Then Yvette returned to the billiard room. She screamed, and we all ran to her.
But when did she kill Mr. Boddy?
When I said. We all ran to the kitchen to see the cook. Yvette hid in the study to check that Mr. Boddy was dead. He got up and followed them down the hall, so she hit him on the head with a candlestick and dragged him to the toilet.
Colonel Mustard,
When we saw the motorist at the front door, you took the key to the weapons cupboard out of my pocket. Then you suggested that we all split up. You separated from Miss Scarlett, crossed the hall, opened the cupboard, took the wrench, ran to the conservatory, entered the lounge through the secret passage, killed the motorist with a blow on the head. Like that!
how did she do it?
Was it because she was acting under orders from the person who later killed her?
Who?
It was her employer, Miss Scarlett.
That's a lie.
Is it? You switched off the electricity. It was easy for you here on the ground floor. Then, in the dark, you got the lead pipe and the rope, strangled Yvette, ran to the library, killed the cop, picked up the gun where Yvette dropped it, opened the front door, recognized the singing telegram from her photograph, and shot her.
So who is the murderer again? Yvette killed the cook and Mr. Boddy. Colonel Mustard killed the motorist. And Miss Scarlett killed the cop, Yvette, and the singing telegram girl. Yes, that Yvette. Honorable mentions go to Professor Plum, because he did try to kill Mr. Boddy, he just failed. Mrs. Peacock, because she did try to kill the cook, but someone beat her to it. And to Wadsworth, who might have actually seen Yvette kill the cook and Mr. Boddy and did nothing about it. And now to make a short story long. To quote Wadsworth, I'm going to tell you how it was all done. That's my bad British accent. Part 1. Notable events from the beginning of the movie up until the first murder. Wadsworth arrives to the house. Yvette and the cook are already there. All the guests arrive one by one, except for Miss Scarlett and Professor Plum, who arrived at the same time because Miss Scarlett's car broke down. Mr. Boddy arrives towards the end of dinner with weapons wrapped in boxes that he hands out later. Wadsworth exposes Mr. Boddy as the blackmailer. Wadsworth tells everyone the police are coming. And Mr. Boddy advises everyone to kill Wadsworth and ends up dead instead. So first let's talk about why does Wadsworth only recognize some of the people that are coming into the house? He recognizes Mrs. White and Miss Scarlett and Professor Plum by face, but he asks Colonel Mustard if it's him, so he doesn't actually know Colonel Mustard. And he says to Mr. Green, you must be Mr. Green, so he doesn't know Mr. Green either. From this, we can conclude that Wadsworth knew some of the blackmail victims, but not all of them. Mr. Boddy and Wadsworth. Wadsworth does not introduce himself to Mr. Boddy when Mr. Boddy arrives. That means they already knew each other. Mr. Boddy asks for the key, and Wadsworth says over his dead body. Basically, after dinner, Mr. Boddy wants the key to the front of the house because Wadsworth has locked them all in, and Wadsworth says, well, no, over my dead body, which is what prompts Mr. Boddy to tell everyone, we should kill Wadsworth so we can all get out of here before the police come. And Wadsworth assumes that the bag Mr. Boddy is carrying contains evidence, which it didn't. It was murder weapons. Let's talk a little bit about why they're all there in the first place. After dinner, when they go to the study, the letter that Wadsworth reads out during dinner is the same letter that apparently all the other guests got except for Mr. Boddy. There's an envelope addressed to Wadsworth laying on the table with instructions to open after dinner. And after dinner, when they all meet up in the study, inside the envelope are some white sheets of paper that Wadsworth says have instructions on them for him to read out loud. But later on, after all this, he says that he invited everyone. And these are two contradictory statements. He has this envelope where he's receiving instructions, but then he says he's the one who invited everybody. So it's a little bit odd. My hypothesis is that Wadsworth did invite everyone. He's working with someone who told him about the other blackmail victims. Because remember, he didn't recognize everybody. And maybe this is that person's house. But more on that later. Serious question here. Back in 1954, can you schedule a police visit? Because a lot of this movie hinges on Wadsworth telling everybody the police is coming in a certain amount of time. And they're all trying to figure out who the murderer is before the police arrive. But I've never actually heard of a police visit being scheduled beforehand. I mean, what would Wadsworth have told them? Wouldn't the police have asked why he needed the police to come out at a specific time and day? Like, hi there, can you come over to the house at 7 p.m. on Sunday? Like, what do you tell them? What? I don't even know. I also want to highlight Mr. Green. He denies being guilty of what he is being blackmailed for, but 3 minutes later, he confesses that he's a homosexual and that's what the blackmail is about. You do see a picture of him in the pile of evidence, but I have my own theories on Mr. Green and how he's different from everybody else, and I will go into that later. Part 2, Mr. Boddy in the study. So after Mr. Boddy tells everybody they should kill Wadsworth, he turns off the lights so somebody can kill him, and no one would have to know who did it. In the darkness, we hear 2 thuds, a groan, the gunshot, the vase breaking, and then a woman scream. When the lights come back on, Wadsworth is calm and in a different area of the room from where he was when the lights went out. At this point, everyone still has their own weapon, though Mrs. Peacock drops hers by the door. Let's start by looking at where everyone was before the lights went out. This is a room layout of the study, which is where everyone is. More on the secret passage later. This room layout is by Murder by Death in the Art of Murder forums. Thank you. Towards the end of the movie, when Wadsworth starts going through the evening, he actually says where everybody was sitting in the study. But what he says is actually not true when we look at where they were sitting before the lights went out. Miss Scarlet, noted in red, was sitting on top of the table in the corner. Mr. Green was nearby. Colonel Mustard and Professor Plum were sitting on the sofa. Mrs. White was sitting on a different sofa next to them. Behind her was Wadsworth. Mrs. Peacock was by the door, and so was Mr. Boddy by the light switch. This screen capture is from when the lights come back on. People have moved around a bit in different places. Everyone is here except Yvette and the cook. They're in different rooms in the house. Mr. Boddy is on the floor, apparently dead. Professor Plum goes over to check him out. Wadsworth is actually in a different position that he was before the lights went out, so that's a smart guy. If, he was afraid anybody was going to try to kill him. So let's see where everybody moved. On the left is a screen capture of where they were after the lights came back on. On the right is where they were before the lights went out. As you can see here, Wadsworth is now towards the left of Miss Scarlet. He went basically to the other side of the room. Miss Scarlet and Mr. Green are more or less in the same area. Professor Plum kneeling by the body. Colonel Mustard is still on the sofa. Mrs. White is off the sofa and all the way towards the back, so she's also in a different area. And the gun is by her foot for whatever reason. And Mrs. Peacock is still by the door. Pay attention to where the bullet hole broke the vase, because Mr. Boddy was standing by the door and the broken vase is on the other side of the room, nowhere near him. In the next scene, Wadsworth completely disappears. But why? Is he out killing the cook? Is he helping Yvette kill the cook? Why would he leave now? He should be in that spot. And there's a secret passageway, as you saw, on the other side. So Wadsworth must have left on the secret passageway. He's just completely gone. Now, how Wadsworth could have snuck into the secret passageway when he's directly in Mrs. White and Mrs. Peacock's line of sight is a whole other mystery. So Mrs. Peacock had the knife as a murder weapon. She drops it by the door when she turns the lights back on and she sees Mr. Boddy on the floor, apparently dead. You can't really see it in this shot from the right, but it could be behind her dress at this point. Now, the audience can't see the door. In one of the alternate endings, if you've seen the movie, you know that Yvette theoretically picked up the knife while it was on the floor when nobody else was watching. Although I don't know how she could have done that when everybody is basically looking in that direction, because that's where the body is. So the knife goes missing. Everyone runs to the mantle because that's where the bullet hole is, leaving the door unattended. This is where theoretically the knife was picked up by Yvette. Now, some people say this is actually a continuity error or some kind of editing problem. Wadsworth could have done it. He's gone from the room at this point, but it is technically easier for Yvette because she's in the billiard room, which is only the next room over. But how would she even know that there was a knife there dropped on the floor? Technically, Wadsworth saw her drop it, so he could have gone to Yvette and say, hey, there's a knife by the door, go get it. So let's talk about when the lights go out. There's 2 thuds. My theory is someone hit Mr. Boddy on the head and then he fell to the ground. One thud is the knock to the head. The other thud is Mr. Boddy falling to the ground. Then there's a groan. That's Mr. Boddy groaning when he hit the ground. Then the gunshot. which I think is a distraction because Mr. Boddy was not standing near the mantle. The vase breaks from the gunshot, and then a woman screams. She was scared, I guess, so that's why she screamed, and it could have been any of the women. Let's hear it.
Now.
So here's what I think happened. Professor Plum tried to kill Mr. Boddy with the butt of the gun by knocking him on the head. A gunshot would have been too obvious because everyone knew he had the gun. He shoots at the wall later so he can say he was attacked by the actual killer in the dark, and then the bullet breaks the vase. Mrs. Peacock actually tried to slit Mr. Boddy's throat in the dark, but missed and cut his ear instead. That's why he has a cut in his ear that Professor Plum says was a bullet grazing it, which again is impossible. Mr. Boddy was not facing the direction of the bullet. It would have had to ricochet worse than a JFK conspiracy theory. Professor Plum pretends that Mr. Boddy is dead so he can kill him later. Part 3. Yvette in the billiard room. At this point, everyone still has their own weapon except Mrs. Peacock. Everyone except Colonel Mustard leaves theirs in the study. Yvette screams and everyone runs to her. Wadsworth turns off the tape recorder that was in the billiard room with Yvette, and he takes the tape with him to the study. Wadsworth admits that he invited everyone there, and he was also a victim of Mr. Boddy's blackmail. According to Wadsworth, him and his wife were broke and so had to basically be slaves and work for Mr. Boddy in his house. And that's why he wanted everyone to get together to try to expose Mr. Boddy, because his wife committed suicide, and so he just wanted to get back at Mr. Boddy and make sure he went to jail. So things of notice in this part. When everybody leaves the study to go to Yvette in the billiard room when she screams, we get this hallway shot where you see all the characters are there, except for the cook and Mr. Boddy, who is allegedly laying dead in the study. But when they open the door to the billiard room, Mrs. Peacock is notably missing. So where was she? She wasn't in the billiard room. The knife that killed the cook was already gone. So if she went back to the study to get the knife, it wouldn't have been there. And she didn't try to use something else to kill Mr. Boddy, believing he was already dead. So my deduction is Mrs. Peacock was going to try to kill the cook, but the cook was already dead. She might have tried to grab a different weapon. She might have gone back to try to get the knife, but couldn't find it. Maybe she tried to get a different murder weapon. If she was smart and this wasn't a movie, she could have just grabbed the knife from the kitchen. But at this point, the cook is already dead. So when she went to the kitchen, she couldn't find her. So who killed the cook? I say Yvette grabbed the knife, Wadsworth disappeared, and that secret passage goes out to the kitchen. So Wadsworth could have very well seen Yvette killed the cook. And Mrs. Peacock may have tried to kill the cook, but she couldn't have done it. Now, the only way you can believe that Mrs. Peacock killed the cook is to believe that the missing knife is a continuity error. Remember, she dropped it and then it disappeared from the floor. But if I believe it's a continuity error or bad editing, then every theory and every clue that we can try to get from this movie falls down like a house of cards. Anything then can be an editing or continuity error. So I have to take it as a fact. The knife went missing after she dropped it. And because the cook was killed with the knife, Mrs. Peacock couldn't have done it. So let's talk about Wadsworth's confession after they all come back from the billiard room. He explains that he was also a victim of Mr. Boddy, his wife's suicide, and how he arranged the whole night. Now, if this is true, was he lying about being told to read out their blackmail crimes from the envelope? Or did he write the envelope himself to make it look like someone was giving him instructions? Part 4, the cook in the kitchen with the knife. Guys, there are so many people missing in the kitchen. So what happens? In the study, while they're talking, everyone realized that there was only one person left in the house that they knew of, and that was the cook. So they all rush to the kitchen. They find the cook dead with Mrs. Peacock's knife stuck in her back. She's actually in the freezer where the secret passage from the study comes out. And then they bring the cook's body into the study. So let's start from the beginning. When they arrive in the kitchen, Wadsworth and Yvette are missing. All the other guests are there. They find the cook in the fridge. Colonel Mustard, Mrs. White, Mr. Green, and Miss Scarlet are all clearly in the shot. And then when Colonel Mustard turns around towards the entrance, Wadsworth is standing there. While everybody's clustered around the cook, the audience watching the movie loses track of who is by the door. So when Colonel Mustard stands up and turns around, he finds Wadsworth at the entrance. But now that means Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock are missing, and Yvette is still missing. So let's talk about where everybody is. It's the map on the right. Mr. Green is by the secret passageway, which is the freezer, or wherever they keep the meat hanging from the hooks, because he's the one who found the body of the cook. The cook, which is the new dead body, is on the floor. Miss Scarlet is next to Mr. Green. Professor Plum and Mrs. White have some little mini argument by the table. Wadsworth, when he's in the room, is always by the stairway, and so is Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock. Yvette nowhere to be found. After accusing Mrs. White of being a murderer of her husband's, hence the Black Widow thing I mentioned at the beginning, Colonel Mustard asks who had the knife, and then he turns towards the door of the kitchen again, and that's when Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum has returned, apparently. So shot by shot, everyone arrives except for Wadsworth and Yvette. Everyone is looking at the body except for Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock. Colonel Mustard turns around and Wadsworth is there, but Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum are missing. And then when he turns again, they've come back. So the only person missing the entire time is Yvette, although these three in the last shot are periodically missing. So where's Yvette? I'm sure you can guess this is going. Part 5, Mr. Boddy in the bathroom with the candlestick. So a quick summary. Once they leave the kitchen, they go back to the study with the body of the cook, and they realize that Mr. Boddy is actually missing, which is funny because he was dead. Mrs. Peacock needs to use the bathroom, and Yvette very badly tells her where to find it. Miss Scarlet finds the pictures of Colonel Mustard having sex and implies that they somehow involve her too. And then Mrs. Peacock finds Mr. Boddy's body, and the group move him to the study as well. And then Wadsworth locks up the remaining weapons. The murder of Mr. Boddy. It had to be Yvette. According to one of the endings, Yvette stayed in the study when everybody else went to the kitchen. When she realizes Mr. Boddy's not dead, probably by him standing up, she kills him with a candlestick and hides his body in the bathroom. And on the right here, you can see a map of the entire layout of the house. So according to the alternate ending, Yvette chased him out of the study as he was running away, and then she killed him at some point in the hall and then dragged his body into the bathroom. Why? I don't know. To create confusion? Maybe. Who knows? But that's basically what happened. So how does that relate to the missing people in the kitchen? Because remember, multiple people were missing in the kitchen. Guys, there were so many people missing in the kitchen. So here's what I think happened. Yvette killed Mr. Boddy. No doubt about that. Wadsworth was late to the kitchen because he was conspiring with Yvette to have Mr. Boddy killed, or also helped kill him, or helped her drag the body to the bathroom, because that seems like a two-man job, Yvette's pretty small. Now, Professor Plum disappeared because he's the one who knew Mr. Boddy was still alive. Even psychiatrists can tell the difference between a patient that's alive or dead. He was planning to kill him later, but was stopped because Mrs. Peacock was hanging out behind him, near him, next to him. She followed him out, basically. It's like, where's this guy going? So he couldn't go back to the study to kill Mr. Boddy because Mrs. Peacock would have seen him. Now, it's possible that Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock might have gotten a glimpse of Yvette killing Mr. Boddy, and then they just went right back into the kitchen because obviously they both wanted him dead. So after that, they decide they're going to lock away the remaining weapons in the cupboard so nobody else can, kill anybody else. What's really funny about that is that it kind of gets this idea that the weapons that have already been used are no longer useful. Like the candlestick was only able to kill one person. Now it's okay if the candlestick is out somewhere because it can't kill ever again. The dagger is still sticking out of the cook's back. Also, no, nobody can get the dagger out of her back and kill somebody else with it. It's a useless weapon now. So they put the weapons in the cupboard, they lock it, and Wadsworth puts the key inside of his pocket. And then everyone gets mad because then he can get the weapons and nobody else can. And what if he's the murderer? So they decide they're going to throw away the key. Part 6. The motorist in the lounge with the wrench. The motorist arrives saying that his car broke down and he's asking to use the phone. Wadsworth puts the key to the weapons cupboard in his pocket, locks the motorist in the lounge, and then throws away a key. We do actually see and hear the key being thrown away, but what key was it? We'll never know. So the key to the cupboard, which you see Wadsworth putting in his pocket here, because he's about to throw it away, and when he opened the door, the motorist was there, so he just put it back in his pocket. According to one of the endings, this is where Colonel Mustard would have been able to get the key and then theoretically replace it with another. However, Colonel Mustard would have had to sneak by Mrs. White to get the key out of the pocket. Now, it might be possible if he had some kind of spy training in the army, maybe. It seems unlikely to me, but there's really no other explanation offered or possible. If Mrs. White had taken the key, she did nothing with it. She's the one standing directly next to him. But where would Colonel Mustard have gotten a substitute key? Where would anybody have gotten the key? So on the left, you have Wadsworth putting the key to the cupboard in his pocket. And on the right, you have him putting the key to where he locked the motorist in his pocket as well. So my deductions are Wadsworth threw away the wrong key, because later on, he can't find the key to open the lounge where the motorist is. But he did throw away a key. Or maybe Wadsworth has multiple pockets in that thing and he didn't notice that Mustard took the cupboard key. Or the keys are interchangeable. Like maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe every room and cupboard and everything else in that house has the same key. So once the motorist is locked in the lounge and the key has theoretically been thrown away, Colonel Mustard asks if anybody's in the house. And when Wadsworth says no, Colonel Mustard suggests they split up into pairs and search the house, just in case there might be some random person hiding there who is the actual murderer. Then they pair up randomly thanks to matchsticks that Wadsworth cuts up and puts together. Then comes searching the house. Now I've used the illustration here that's on some of the posters and DVD covers and such for Clue. I've changed the pictures of the characters around a bit so you can see what area of the house they're searching together. Mrs. White and Wadsworth search different rooms on the second floor. They're both on the second floor, but they're never really in the same room together. They just search rooms separately. On screen, Professor Plum is never seen separated from Mrs. Peacock. They're searching the basement. Mr. Green never separates from Yvette on screen, at least on this part of the house search. They're always in the attic. Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet are on the first floor, and they do separate. When Miss Scarlet goes to the ballroom, Colonel Mustard leaves and tells her that he's going to go search the kitchen. We never see him in the kitchen. We do see Miss Scarlet in the ballroom a lot. Let's talk about the motorist car for a second. In this scene, you can see here, the police is driving by the motorist car. It really does look like it's hanging off the edge of something. And that's when the police car comes by. The cop actually looks into the window and everything. I mean, everything looks legit here. Burning the evidence. While everybody's searching the house, the lights are still on. Someone is on the first floor burning the evidence. This person adds negatives and the reel of presumably the tape recording from Yvette in the billiard room and throws it into the fireplace. It has to be Colonel Mustard. Everyone else is accounted for, and Colonel Mustard went missing when he told Miss Scarlet that he was going to go search the kitchen. We never see him in the kitchen. Now, here in the evidence that's getting burnt up is a picture of Colonel Mustard and the motorist. Yes, that motorist, the one in the lounge. There's a picture of Mr. Green. There's a picture of Mr. Boddy. I think that might be Mrs. White in the top right, and can't be sure. And I've tried to zoom into that letter, but I can't read it, sorry. So let's talk about the murder of the motorist. He's in the lounge, and there's a secret passageway in the fireplace. You can see it in the mirror there. Whoever's burning the evidence, that was in the same room, the study, as the weapons cupboard. And then the gloved hand, because that's what you see, opens the cupboard with the key. You already know, I think it's Colonel Mustard. So they take out the wrench, which is Colonel Mustard's weapon. In the movie, that's the weapon he was gifted with. Not that everyone murders with their own weapon here. Then you can see the motorist talking on the phone in the lounge. Not sure who he's talking to. And as the motorist is talking, the secret passageway opens up. On the phone, the motorist says, quote, "And one of them is my old boss from," end quote. And that's basically when he dies. So why is the motorist there? His car just happened to break down. I mean, it has to be one of the most craziest coincidences ever, right? Your car just breaks down in the middle of the night, and the closest place is the house where your old army boss was. And if that's the case, why didn't he see Colonel Mustard and be like, "Hey, Colonel, how you doing? It's me. Remember me from back in the day?" Like that's so sketchy. Like he knows that's his boss, but he doesn't say anything. This is not a coincidence. Come on. Someone told him to go there and pretend his car just happened to break down. Or, I mean, it's weird because it really does look like his car is hanging off the side. I think that maybe, that could have been the case. He was going to go over and pretend his car was broken down at the bottom of the hill or the gate or whatever. And then it was rainy, so he did happen to go off the road a bit and, makes everything looks more legit. So my deduction is, yeah, someone told him to go there under false pretenses and also told him to pretend his car broke down as a way to get into the house. And also to pretend that he didn't know Colonel Mustard. So let's talk about the secret passageway. Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet go to the conservatory together. And they find the secret passageway. Technically, Colonel Mustard did. He saw a flashlight, picked it up, leaned back against the wall, and fell through it because that was the door to the secret passageway. They go through the secret passageway into the lounge. The fireplace door of the passageway was still open. They didn't have to open it. And they find the motorist dead. Miss Scarlet starts screaming, and then everybody comes from all sides of the house to where the screaming is. Wadsworth tries to open the door to the lounge, but the key is gone. They try to break the door down. It doesn't work. Yvette runs to the weapons cupboard. It's already open. She grabs the gun, and then she shoots out the lock so they can open the door to the lounge. Everyone learns about the secret passageway once they get into the room, and Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet explain how they found the motorist dead. And then everyone realizes that the cupboard is open. Yvette says it was open. She thought she could break it open somehow, but it was open already. Yvette drops the gun by throwing it into the chandelier that fell on the floor. Part 7. The cop arrives. The doorbell rings. Mr. Green opens the door, sees the cop, and then quickly slams the door in the cop's face before opening it again. The cop recognizes Yvette, sort of, but he can't quite place how he knows her. Wadsworth locks the cop into the library. Then J. Edgar Hoover calls, the head of the FBI back then. The cop answers the phone, and then he gives the phone to Wadsworth. Then Mr. Green gives the cop a tour of the house where everybody kind of props the dead bodies up, Weekend at Bernie style. And then Wadsworth locks the cop again into the library after he finishes his phone call. So let's talk about Mr. Green and the cop. Because why would Mr. Green slam the door in the cop's face and then open the door and nearly confess everything? Because that's basically what happened. He opens the door and, you think, he slams the door because, oh no, the police are here and there's a bunch of dead bodies. But then when he opens the door again, it looks like he's ready to confess that there is something suspicious going on here. Meanwhile, everybody else is like, no, everything's fine. So Wadsworth locks the cop in the library. How many keys does Wadsworth have again? Like, seriously, every room in this house has a key. How many pockets does he have? He should be jingling when he's walking. Now, the biggest question of all, I think, in this movie is, why is the FBI calling? The only thing that Wadsworth said is that the cops are coming at a certain time. And I think everybody just thought that meant the regular police, not the FBI. Why is the FBI not even just the FBI? J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. Now, remember when I said Wadsworth was most likely working with someone else? This is what I mean. Theory 1, Wadsworth is working for or with the FBI, as suggested in one of the 3 endings. Theory 2, Mr. Green is working for the FBI, as suggested in one of the 3 endings. Theory 3, Wadsworth is blackmailing J. Edgar Hoover. I don't believe that's the case, but, it's possible, I guess. Theory 4, the call is a red herring. That means maybe it's fake. Maybe it's just somebody who's saying it's J. Edgar Hoover. It's not like they can FaceTime and we can actually see J. Edgar Hoover. It's not like the cop would recognize J. Edgar Hoover's voice. I sincerely doubt it. But, maybe it's a fake. Who knows? And theory 5, Wadsworth said that the house belonged to a friend of his. So maybe that friend is involved with the FBI. So while Wadsworth is talking to J. Edgar Hoover, Mr. Green gives the cop a tour of the house. The group finds ways to fake that the corpses are still alive in pretty hilarious fashion. Yvette is missing the entire time. After he finishes his phone call, Wadsworth takes the cop back to the library and locks him in again. But this time he leaves the key in the door. He doesn't put it in his pocket. Again, how many keys does Wadsworth have? Come on. Then everybody goes back to searching the house again. Back to their original locations. Mr. Green and Yvette are in the attic. Mrs. White and Wadsworth are on the second floor. Miss Scarlet and Colonel Mustard are on the first floor. And Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock are in the basement. So Miss Scarlet and Colonel Mustard go to check the kitchen, theoretically again, because remember, Colonel Mustard told her that he already searched the kitchen when she was in the ballroom. While they're in the kitchen, Miss Scarlet finds the secret passageway that goes from the kitchen to the study. And that part's a bit anticlimactic. They just kind of see the bodies and shrug and keep moving. Part 8. 3 more murders. So the group splits up to search the house. And while they're doing that, someone turns off the electricity. The cop, Yvette, and the singing telegram girl get murdered. Wadsworth rushes down the stairs and turns on the electricity. The group find the murdered people, and then Wadsworth announces that he knows who did it. And furthermore, he's going to tell you how it was all done. So let's start with the lights going out. The first people we see is Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock. They're obviously in the cellar. We see Wadsworth in a room with some mirrors. You can see his reflection there. You can see Mrs. White, and she starts screaming. And then you see Yvette going down the stairs, and she looks up towards the second floor where you can still hear Mrs. White screaming. Now, Yvette didn't turn off the electricity. She was in the attic. But the fact that she snuck away to meet someone in the billiard room implies that she knew it was going to happen, and she was expecting to meet somebody on the first floor. Now, the only people unaccounted for at this time are Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet. Theoretically, we don't see Mr. Green, but if she was meeting Mr. Green, why would he already be on the first floor? Then she gets strangled. Now, Yvette in the billiard room with the rope. Theory 1. Yvette was working with someone in the house, but did not suspect that that person was the killer, or at the very least, a killer. And funny enough, Yvette loses her accent here. I may not have mentioned it, and if you haven't seen the movie, you don't know, but maybe you can deduce from her outfit. Yvette has a French accent throughout the movie, and it's fake, because as soon as we get here to her in the billiard room with whoever she was supposed to be meeting, the French accent is gone. Then there's the cop in the library with the lead pipe. Who is he talking to? We'll never know. He gets hit in the head and murdered with the lead pipe. Then the doorbell rings again, and we get shots of everybody in the dark, but it's too dark to see where they are. Someone opens the door, and it's the singing telegram girl, and she starts to sing, even though the house is all dark, and somebody answered in the dark, she still starts to sing, and she gets shot. After that, we get another look of the group in the dark. This time we start off with Mr. Green, who can't see, so he accidentally walks into a closet in the attic. We see Colonel Mustard in the dining room, ducking under the table, presumably because, gunshot. Mrs. White accidentally lets off some kind of giant jack-in-the-box, and she starts screaming. Wadsworth says he's going to go rescue her, tries to open the door, but he's actually in the bathroom, and he gets water all over him in the shower. And then we see Wadsworth coming down the stairs and turning on the electricity. So then everyone reunites. You can see everybody coming down to the first floor from their different areas. You can see Mr. Green was upstairs. We heard Mrs. White upstairs screaming. Colonel Mustard is coming out there. You can see Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum coming up from the cellar, and you can see Miss Scarlet over there. You can clearly see that Miss Scarlet and Colonel Mustard were separated during the blackout. Colonel Mustard is coming from the area of the dining room where we saw him at the table. Miss Scarlet, however, is up top over there, coming from either the kitchen, the ballroom, or the conservatory. Or maybe the bathroom. So part 9, Wadsworth's explanation. Wadsworth states that he knows who did all the murders, and he recreates the night and each murder one by one. Wadsworth says that everyone who came to the house was part of Mr. Boddy's blackmail scheme, and that the motorist, that includes the motorist and the cop. And then when it comes to the part of the story where the murderer shuts off the electricity, he shuts off the electricity. And that moment is what sets off variations in the story. But let's start with the cook. Wadsworth implies that the cook worked for one of the guests, but he doesn't say who. He only says who in one of the possible endings, not during the explanation. Yvette. Yvette was Mrs. White's husband's mistress. Yvette worked for Miss Scarlet, presumably as an escort. Colonel Mustard was one of Yvette's clients. Now, Colonel Mustard said that Mr. Boddy threatened to send the pictures of him and Yvette to his mom. But at the beginning of the movie, when Wadsworth questioned how it is that Colonel Mustard seems to have so much money, considering he's just a colonel, Colonel Mustard said that his parents were died and he inherited the money. So he's obviously lying about, one of them. Are his parents dead? Or did Mr. Boddy threaten to send the pictures of him and Yvette to his mom? And here's the actual story. Colonel Mustard admits that he knew the motorist, and that the motorist is most likely the person who ratted him out to Mr. Boddy, because the motorist knew some of the illegal stuff that Colonel Mustard was doing while he was in the army. The motorist knew Colonel Mustard was stealing parts from the U.S. Armed Forces and selling them in the black market. Then Miss Scarlet admits that she was bribing the cop to continue with her illegal business dealings. Professor Plum admits that he was having an affair with the singing telegram girl. She was his patient, and he suspected that she's the one who told Mr. Boddy about their affair, causing him to get blackmailed, and he'd already lost his license to practice since the affair was discovered. Then right before Wadsworth turns off the electricity, the doorbell rings again. Mrs. Peacock answers the door, and there's an evangelist out there. Now, showing up during the explanation implies that Wadsworth was not expecting this guy, because if he was, he would have waited until the evangelist arrived before he told the story. He would assume there needs to be one more person murdered here. I'm waiting for the evangelist. I don't think he was expecting him. It just doesn't seem to be the case. The camera cuts to the guests in the house, and you can see Mr. Green is taking off his glasses and he's backing away from the door. Now, why would an evangelist or anybody really be going door to door at this time of night, in the dark, after a storm, to a house on top of a hill, which you have to assume is pretty far away from the house next to it? This is very highly suspicious. I don't think this guy is an evangelist. Part 10, the 3 different endings. Now, when I talk about the 3 endings, I'm really only taking the clues from the movie up until the point that Wadsworth shuts off the electricity, because all 3 alternate endings start right after that happens, and different things happen in each of the alternate endings. So therefore, only everything in the movie up until that point is going to be taken as canon, where you can look at clues. Everything after is just an alternate ending. So just to explain the alternate endings, if you're not familiar with Clue, when the movie was released, depending on what movie theater you went to, maybe even what time you saw the movie, you might have seen a different ending. There were 3 different endings that were sent out with the film to the movie theater. So you might have gone to a movie and then you're talking about it the next day with somebody and oh, so-and-so was the killer. That was amazing. And they're like, what are you talking about? It was so-and-so. What? No, I saw the movie. It was on the posters, but maybe I'm pretty sure that must have happened. Yes, there was 3 different endings. And if you were watching at home, like I did, I did not see it in 1985 in the theater. I saw it at home. Or if you have the DVD, then you have the three endings. And the endings are: everyone did it, Mrs. Peacock did it alone, or Mrs. Scarlet did it. So let's talk about the everyone did it ending. That one was my favorite as a kid. I really liked the idea that actually they all did it. They all had a hand in, killing who they didn't like for whatever reason. And that there wasn't just one murder and everyone was guilty. I love that ending. Unfortunately, now that I've been analyzing this movie so much, that ending does not hold up at all. This is called the "but here's what really happened" ending. So when you're watching this with all three endings, you usually see either Miss Scarlet did it or Miss Peacock did it, and then the last one, the title card says, "but here's what really happened." This is the supposed explanation of the movie. This is what the movie is telling you actually happened, but it could not have possibly happened. I'm sorry. First of all, Professor Plum never had an opportunity to kill Mr. Boddy unless Yvette and Mrs. Peacock saw him. Mind you, that's possible. Again, remember I said it is impossible to know what actually happened based on the clues in the movie. So what I'm offering is a theory. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is impossible for Professor Plum to have killed Mr. Boddy unless Yvette and Mrs. Peacock saw him. Again, that might be true. Maybe they did. Maybe Professor Plum killed him when he wasn't in the kitchen. But then Yvette and Wadsworth and Mrs. Peacock would have seen him do it. Maybe all four of them dragged Mr. Boddy into the bathroom before going back to the kitchen. That is possible. I don't think it's probable, though. Not, and then everybody, all these four people pretending they don't know what happened. Mrs. Peacock couldn't kill the cook because the knife went missing. Now, I've explained that one to death and I stand by it. Wadsworth does point out that the cook used to work for her in one, maybe two of the endings. So that's where my theory of Mrs. Peacock wanted to kill the cook, but just didn't get the opportunity. Now, Mrs. White could not have killed Yvette. We saw and heard her on the second floor screaming when Yvette went down the stairs. So there's no way that Yvette went into the billiard room while Mrs. Scarlet was upstairs on the second floor screaming. And then she ran down the stairs to, get into the billiard room before Yvette did? No. As much as I love this ending, Mrs. White could not have killed Yvette. And then Wadsworth could not have killed the singing telegram girl. It's just kind of ridiculous to think that he could have. He would have had to come down the stairs, grab the gun, kill the singing telegram girl, then go back up the stairs, shower himself with water, remember that scene, and then come down the stairs again to turn on the light. I mean, is it possible? I really don't think so. It's a great alibi. Like, oh, look, I'm soaking wet. So obviously I didn't kill the singing telegram girl. But I think it's extremely unlikely. So I'm just going to say no, it didn't happen. So let's talk about the Mrs. Peacock did it all ending. Now, Mrs. Peacock couldn't have killed Mr. Boddy unless Yvette and Professor Plum, maybe even Wadsworth, saw her do it. Again, that might be what actually happened. It is a possibility that these four characters got together and killed this dude who was blackmailing them. That is possible, but I don't think it's likely. Again, she could not have killed the cook. And yes, Wadsworth points out that the cook used to work for her, but she didn't do it, okay? And she couldn't have killed the motorist, the cop, Yvette, or the singing telegram girl because we clearly saw her in the cellar the whole time. So now we come to Mrs. Scarlet did it with Yvette's help. Mrs. Scarlet couldn't have killed the motorist. We clearly saw her in the ballroom taking her time. She was kind of scared, walking over to the drapes and moving them out of the way. And Colonel Mustard was the one that was missing the whole time there. But everything else in that ending could very well have happened. That is the ending where Yvette kills the cook. She kills Mr. Boddy. And then Miss Scarlet, who was on the first floor and we didn't see where she was the entire time of the blackout and stuff, she was already on the first floor. So yeah, she could have very easily killed everybody else. And since she was Yvette's employer at some point, she could have very well told Yvette, yeah, let's meet in the billiard room. I'm going to turn off the lights and I don't know, we're going to do some stuff. And then, she kills her. Part 11, other considerations. Who exactly does Yvette work for? Yvette might have been involved in the lives of several of these people. She was sleeping with Mrs. White's husband, presumably also Colonel Mustard, and she worked for Miss Scarlet. But how was she involved in the blackmail exactly? Did she tell Mr. Boddy that Miss Scarlet was blackmailing the cop? Is that how? And, maybe Mr. Boddy was giving her some money on the side. Maybe she informed on everyone. Maybe she told Mr. Boddy, hey, I'm sleeping with this guy and now he's dead and I think his wife killed him. And that's how Mrs. White was getting blackmailed. But at dinner, Yvette was clearly uncomfortable with Mr. Boddy. So it's possible that she was a victim too. Like maybe Mr. Boddy was blackmailing her for information and she did tell him about Miss Scarlet and Mrs. White, but, only because, she was getting blackmailed because, prostitution's illegal. So maybe he's like, hey, I'm going to call the cops on you if you don't do this stuff for me and get me some information. She didn't like the guy. We're also not sure how Mrs. White is being blackmailed. There was no one who showed up at the house that was an informant on Mrs. White, which is what makes me think that it might have been Yvette. Maybe she had some kind of evidence that she killed him or killed, all of her husbands. And who is Mr. Green exactly? Now, without a doubt, Mr. Green didn't kill anyone and had no one associated with blackmailing him enter the house. The only time he acts suspicious is when the evangelist shows up at the door, but he wasn't let into the house, so presumably Wadsworth wasn't expecting him. It's never really clear how Mr. Green is being blackmailed. Like how did Mr. Boddy know that Mr. Green was a homosexual? I mean, presumably, someone Mr. Green dated or something, but it's never clear. No one ever comes for him. There's no evidence that's pointed at. What exactly was Wadsworth planning with this evening? Every informant seems to be there under some kind of false pretense. The motorist is pretending he doesn't recognize Colonel Mustard. The cop, I guess, is pretending he doesn't recognize Miss Scarlet. The singing telegram girl is performing her job. She's singing, but, I can't imagine Wadsworth thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a singing telegram girl come in and sing a song who just happens to be the girl that Professor Plum had an affair with? I'm pretty sure the cook wasn't brought in just to cook them dinner. She used to work for Mrs. Peacock and is presumably the one who told Mr. Boddy about Mrs. Peacock receiving bribes. And he keeps letting people arrive and he locks them into these rooms despite the fact that they all keep getting killed. The FBI, the police, and the evangelist. Now, Wadsworth said he had scheduled a police visit for this evening, but the evangelist doesn't say he's a policeman. He's posing as an evangelist going door to door. Wadsworth never lets him in, says, oh, here's the police. Thank you, everybody. In one of the endings, he says that, why would the police come? Nobody's called them. But the FBI did call the house. I feel like people forgot that by the end. And I know that I said that I wasn't taking anything from the 3 endings as canon, but I do want to point out that in every single one of the endings, the evangelist is an undercover law officer. Communism was just a red herring. In the alternate endings, it's implied that some of the blackmail material really has to do with the guest's involvement in some type of communism or maybe being sympathetic to communism. But it's implied that communism was just a red herring. Now, everybody there is involved in government in some form or another, so it might or might not have been a red herring. I have a theory about how it sort of isn't a red herring, which brings me to part 12. Why? Why did all this happen? What is everybody doing there? So this is going to sound a little crazy, but this is how I've managed to tie the entire movie together. Starting with the entire night was a sting operation. This explains why Wadsworth has letters as instructions, the call from J. Edgar Hoover, and the evangelist. Wadsworth was being blackmailed at some point by Mr. Boddy. After his wife's death, with no one left to protect, he goes to the FBI to inform them of Mr. Boddy's blackmail ring. The FBI set up the dinner party as a sting operation and left instructions for Wadsworth. That's why J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, called. The intention was for the FBI to catch the blackmailer, catch all the informants, and actually catch the guests as well, because some of them were doing some illegal activity, and there's really no reason Wadsworth should care about, any of that. And that's why I say that communism was or was not a red herring. It's not to say that that whole storyline about, the guests being communist or communist sympathetic or whatever, was invalid. It's just to say the fact that they're all involved in the government somehow would be a very good reason why the FBI would want to catch them. Remember, Mrs. Peacock is receiving bribes and her husband is a senator. Mrs. White's husband also worked in some kind of fusion bomb testing. He was some kind of government scientist. So the FBI would have a very good reason to go through this elaborate plan to catch these people. And because a lot of these people are doing a lot of bad stuff, Wadsworth did not care if Mr. Boddy and the other informants died. This explains why he is watching people die left and right and does absolutely nothing about it, even though he seems to know who did it. Wadsworth hates Mr. Boddy, and he has no sympathy for the others either. Mr. Green is an undercover FBI agent that went in place of the real Mr. Green. This explains why Wadsworth didn't recognize him, why no accomplices for him showed up, why he backed away from the evangelist and took off his glasses. It was a signal. There must have been a real Mr. Green because Mr. Boddy would know how many people he was blackmailing. He knew to expect Mr. Green because he had the exact number of presents. Now, this was a little bit more obvious. Yvette is a double agent. This explains why she seems to hate Mr. Boddy, and yet she is someone's accomplice. She might have been being blackmailed by Mr. Boddy. She might have been the one who informed Mr. Boddy about Mrs. White. But I don't doubt that at the house she was working for Miss Scarlet, and that's what lured her down the stairs and how Miss Scarlet was able to kill her. So here's what I think happened. Wadsworth contacted the FBI to rat out Mr. Boddy. They set up a sting operation and sent an agent undercover as Mr. Green. Wadsworth or the FBI got the accomplices and Mr. Boddy to go to the house that night. Professor Plum tried to kill Mr. Boddy, then faked a gunshot to throw off suspicion. Yvette stole the knife and killed the cook. Then she was later able to kill Mr. Boddy, and Plum and Peacock might have seen her do it. Colonel Mustard found the secret passageway when he was separated from Miss Scarlet, burned all the evidence, and killed the motorist. Then Miss Scarlet turned off the electricity, killed the cop she'd been bribing, killed Yvette in case Yvette had double-crossed her, and then killed the singing telegram girl because she arrived at the wrong time. The end. But wait, there's more. Part 13. The Clue novelization and movie storybook. I told you I'd be talking about this. So, who owns the house? Remember, Wadsworth said it was a friend of his, and then my theory is that it was being used for a government sting operation. Well, in Clue, a novel by Malcolm McDowell, came out in 1985, we get this. No one seemed to know who owned it. The taxes on the place were paid for by an old firm of lawyers in Baltimore. So that just gives weight to my theory that it's a government house that was being used in this sting operation. No one lives there. The impossible floor plan is explained. Now, in the movie, the secret passageway that goes from the study comes out in the kitchen, and the secret passageway from the lounge comes out to the conservatory. And as you can see this map, that is kind of impossible. But in the novelization, to get from one end of a secret passageway to another, a person is described as going up and down flights of stairs. So that means the secret passageway is probably going around the cellar, probably not in the cellar, but inside the walls of the cellar. Here we see in Clue, a novel. There were 12 steps down. At the bottom, they paused. We're in the cellar, said Miss Scarlet, the words echoed. And in the storybook, they reached the bottom of the stairs and inched their way through a clammy, narrow stone passage that wound in all directions. At last, they reached another stairway and climbed to the top. When Mr. Boddy turns off the electricity, after giving everybody the presents, there is a loud, satisfied thud. Someone gasped, then one of the ladies screamed. Crack, a gun fired once. A piece of glass or china was shattered. Then there was a scuffle of feet against furniture, and something large toppled over onto the rug. Someone groaned, someone else screamed, but it wasn't one of the ladies. This is a little bit different than in the movie. You'll notice there's a few extra sounds that are in the book, including an extra male voice screaming at the end. The novelization and the storybook kind of throw off any theories you might have about the movie, and you're going to see why in a second. Now, in the storybook, the motorist arriving is presented this way. The driver was going too fast. He screeched around a corner and skidded off the road. And then he goes up to the door and he says, I didn't mean to disturb the whole household, but my car broke down. So the second part of that is from the movie. But in the first part, it seems like it was an accident. You know, he was driving too fast and he skidded off the road, which doesn't really go with the theory that, you know, he's there under false pretenses. Then there's the key to the lounge. Now, In the books, Wadsworth leaves the key to the lounge in the keyhole, and then it went missing when they tried to get in, as opposed to in the movie where he puts the key in his pocket and then may or may not have accidentally thrown it out the door a few seconds later. Wadsworth nodded when he realized the colonel was suggesting. Then he silently locked the driver in the lounge, leaving the key in the lock. And then he goes and he throws away the key to the cupboard. Then, after the motorist dies and everybody rushes the door, Mr. Green shouts, "The key is gone." So in the book, someone stole the key to the lounge for some reason, because even in the books, the motorist is killed by somebody coming in through the secret passageway, not opening the door. So now here's the biggest conflict with the books and the movie. In the books, it really does sound like there must have been another person hiding in the house and killing people while Wadsworth and the guests split up to look. Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet go into the lounge through the secret passageway, but the room is dark, the lights have been turned on, they can't see. So here we see somebody rushes past them and goes back into the secret passageway. Let me repeat that. Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet walk into the room. It's dark. They can't see anything. Somebody knocks Miss Scarlet over as they rush back into the secret passageway. It's impossible for Colonel Mustard to have killed the motorist. He didn't do it in the books, but everybody else is accounted for in the movie. So if we combine the two together, then there is actually a mystery person that we never ever saw in the house. Again, I'm not counting this because this is the books, not the movie. I'm really only looking at the movie, but just some food for thought there, that if you read the books, the killer, it's even more confusing. And then the other huge difference between the books and the movie is the fourth ending. Now, apparently they actually did film parts of a fourth ending or a whole fourth ending for the movie, or maybe it was just in the script, but it wasn't part of the movie that was released, but they kept the fourth ending in the novelizations. So we do know what happened. In Clue the Storybook, as you're reading the book and you get towards the end, it's kind of similar to the movies, where after Wadsworth announces that he knows who the murderer is, the book says, "Do you?" And then depending on who you think did it, or which one of these sentences makes sense to you, you continue reading or you flip to that page. If you think the butler did it, that's the fourth ending, which is Wadsworth did it all. In the Clue novelization, it's not broken up this way, choose your own adventure style. You kind of just have to go to each, the section one after the other, and whichever one makes sense to you, I guess. So let's talk about the fourth ending. Wadsworth did it all. The fourth ending was cut from the movie, and in it, Wadsworth is the sole murderer. In the Everyone Did It ending, Wadsworth killed the singing telegram girl, but like I said, in the fourth ending, he killed everybody. In Clue the Storybook, Wadsworth tries to pin the murders on Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum, but Professor Plum calls him out. Professor Plum figures everything out and exposes Wadsworth as the killer. And it's similar in the novelization, just slightly more drawn out. He tries to frame other people, but Professor Plum calls him out. "Of course," said the professor. "Who knew every detail about us? Who brought us all here? And Mr. Boddy, and all the victims? Who had the key to the cupboard with the weapons?" So to summarize the fourth ending, Wadsworth tries to frame Peacock and Plum, but Plum calls him out. Wadsworth killed the cook when everybody else was on the floor of the study looking at Mr. Boddy. Now, remember in the movie, Wadsworth does go missing for part of the scene. And, the secret passageway was right there. And that's why I mentioned it, because it does seem like they were planning on having a clue there for this possible fourth ending. Wadsworth then kills Mr. Boddy and the others in order to commit the perfect crime, because he thought he had never been able to achieve perfection before. I didn't write this, okay? Then it turns out that Wadsworth poisoned the champagne that everyone was drinking all night, and now they have about 3 hours to live. He locks them in the house, and then he disables the phones in the house. The FBI comes in to save everyone, but Wadsworth outsmarts them all. He runs off, he steals a police car, but then it turns out that the dogs from the beginning of the movie, there was 2 Rottweilers in front of the house at the beginning of the movie. And it turns out that at least one of them had gotten into the police car And then they attacked him. And the guests are able to escape by smashing the window of the conservatory. No word on whether they got to the antidote to the champagne poison in time or if they just all died. And I believe that's one of the reasons that the fourth ending was cut. It was just really dark. But to go over this ending, while it is possible that Wadsworth killed Mr. Boddy, I think I said this before, it would have to have been with Yvette watching, like maybe instead of Yvette killing Mr. Boddy with the candlestick, maybe it was Wadsworth who did it and Yvette saw him and helped them. But he couldn't have killed the cook because the cook was killed with the dagger Mrs. Peacock had, and he didn't have an opportunity to grab it. Yvette did it, and maybe Wadsworth did see her, like because he did go through that secret passageway, right? He was missing in the study. As far as the others, the motorist, the cop, Yvette, and the singing telegram girl, I don't think so. You can see Wadsworth clearly on the second floor during that whole time. And considering that you couldn't see some of the other people, I just think it's basically near impossible for him to have been the killer. So a few other differences in the novelizations versus the movies. Yvette is briefly in the kitchen scene when they find the cook dead. And she loses her accent sometimes throughout the book, not just at the end. Colonel Mustard is astonished at Yvette's accent, which is funny because considering that there was proof that Colonel Mustard and Yvette had been intimate in some fashion, it implies that she did not have a French accent when they were together. Mr. Boddy is also from DC, which is where everybody either lives or like there's one person who has the government job. According to Mr. Boddy, he knows who Wadsworth really is. What that means, I don't know. Socialist sympathizer, as he said that his wife had socialist friends, or maybe something else more sinister, who knows? In the novelization and the storybook, the power switch is located in the kitchen, not at the top of the stairs of the cellar. Just like in the movie, only the weapons that haven't killed anyone get locked in the cupboard, which I think is hilarious. Colonel Mustard finds the secret passageway because it was left ajar. In the Everybody Did It ending, it was Wadsworth that told Colonel Mustard where to find the secret passage, which I thought was really interesting. So epilogue, we're almost done. Let's talk about the reboot. So apparently Ryan Reynolds was trying to make a reboot to Clue, starring himself and Jason Bateman. And they had a director on board already. The most recent efforts, according to Screen Rant, which is this image here is from Screen Rant, the most recent efforts saw Ryan Reynolds sign on to star and produce under his first look deal with the studio in 2018, and Deadpool writers Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick set to script, and Jason Bateman in talks to direct, star, and help with the script. I don't know if we're ever going to end up ever getting that made. It's one of those things that in the shuffle of Disney acquiring Fox, I'm not sure we'll ever get to. But then earlier this year in January from Looper, that's the one on the right, with the director in place though, we're going to venture a guess that the flick could enter production by late this year. And we find it likely that Studio Paramount could be shooting for a release in the vicinity of the 2021 holiday season. So if you didn't get that, this article is dated that it was updated January 21st, 2022. But at some point in the article, they predicted that it might be released in the holiday season of 2021, which is basically a few months ago. So it's a little bit cloudy. I don't know what the status of the Clue reboot is. And that is all I'm going to say about it. All right, so that is the end of the video. Oh my God, did you stay with me this whole time? Am I crazy? Go ahead and let me know if you disagree with my theories. Like I said, it's kind of impossible to truly know what actually happened, and I've changed my mind about the events a few times through the years as well. I leave you with the words of Colonel Mustard and Mrs. White.
There's still one thing I don't understand.
One thing.